So today's topic is on Parkinsonism and Parkinson's disease. In clinical practice, patients are being treated for all types of tremors as Parkinson's disease. So it is a overdiagnosis. And Parkinsonism, where the patient does not have tremors but has all other problems with postural instability and frequent falls, they are misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. So this talk is to clarify the underdiagnosis as well as the overdiagnosis problem. Now, what is Parkinsonism? It is a syndrome consisting of four important points: rigidity, bradykinesia, tremors, and gait disorder. Now, what is the difference between rigidity and bradykinesia? Rigidity is what we feel on clinical examination, where there is a resistance to passive movement. Both antagonists and agonists are same. In the absence of rigidity on clinical examination, the patient has far less movement on one side of the body. That is called as bradykinesia. Then, of course, tremors and gait disorders. Now, what are the causes of Parkinsonism? The commonest is idiopathic Parkinson's disease, which is a relentlessly progressive degenerative disease. Then there are secondary Parkinsonism, where the Parkinsonism features are there, but not a degenerative disease. So that is very important from patient's point of view, because you will be able to help him to get out of the symptoms. Then we have vascular Parkinsonism, and lastly the Parkinson plus or atypical Parkinsonism, where the diagnosis is missed and unnecessarily investigations are being done. The secondary Parkinsonism and vascular Parkinsonism are treatable conditions. Idiopathic Parkinson is a relentlessly progressive, we can give symptomatic relief, and Parkinson plus unnecessary investigation should be avoided. Now we'll start with the first one, that is the idiopathic Parkinson's disease. Very interesting story. James Parkinson was a British physician. In the year 1817, he wrote an essay you see the book here, an essay on shaking palsy. It's a very, very apt description. It is a palsy because there is a paucity of movement. It is like a paralysis. At the same time, it is not paralyzed, but it is shaking. Look at the clear notation which he has done: involuntary tremulous motion with lessened muscular power in parts not in action, and when supported, with a propensity to bend the trunk forward and to pass from a walking to a running pace, the senses and intellects being uninjured. So this clinical description of Parkinson is still unsurpassed. Even today, we continue to say the same thing. What is more interesting is he has reported on 6 cases, 3 of them observed in the streets of London. So he used to follow these patients and look at their gait or speech and make notes, and then he used to see one patient one distance only. So just by observing 6 cases, he has written his observations and he has immortalized himself today's medical science. Now, what are the diagnostic features of Parkinson's disease? Very important: unilateral onset, tremors at rest, bradykinesia, rigidity, and most important, excellent response to levodopa. Up to 10 years, they will have a good response to levodopa. So whenever you have made a diagnosis of Parkinson and you find that patient is not responding to levodopa, then you revise your diagnosis. It is unilateral resting tremor with bradykinesia and rigidity. And the UK brain criteria says if you follow these clinical symptoms and signs, the diagnosis is 99% accurate. Now, let me describe to you the differentiating features of Parkinson and essential tremor, because oftentimes in clinical practice, essential tremors are misdiagnosed as Parkinson, and nowadays the patient will go into the Google search and then get all the bad impressions about Parkinson's disease. Now, these are the important things. Parkinson's tremor always starts above 50, whereas essential tremors are seen in the teens or again after 50. Family history is very positive in essential tremor. Very important, Parkinson's tremor is unilateral and at rest, whereas this is symmetrical and this is on posture or kinetic. So the moment the patient keeps his hand on the thigh and resting it, the tremor starts. When you ask him to pick up a glass of water, he is able to do it without tremors. Whereas in essential tremor, as he is picking up a glass of water and holding the glass, the tremors will start. So it's a very important clinical point. So the distribution, Parkinson tremors can be seen even in the legs, whereas in essential tremor, the head, that is called as titubation, there can be voice tremors also. Because of bradykinesia and rigidity, the writing is a micrographia, whereas here it is a tremulousness of the writing. Course is progressive, relentlessly progressive, whereas in essential tremor, it is stable or very slowly progressive. Now, what is the Parkinson's disease due to? It is due to nigrostriatal neuronal degeneration. So in the substantia nigra, there is a degeneration of the neurons. Normally, the dopamine which is secreted is becoming less and less. So as the dopamine concentration becomes 70 to 80% loss, then only the symptoms of Parkinson appear. We all know that we are all blessed with two kidneys, and until 1.5 kidneys fail, we don't get the symptoms of renal failure. So much of storage is there. So similarly here, 80% loss of dopamine will start producing the Parkinson symptoms. But there is an important point. Before the 80% loss, can we diagnose when it is 50% loss? So that is called as a pre-symptomatic Parkinson, which I'll come to it a little later. Now, this causes dopamine deficiency, which is responsible for motor symptoms, that is rigidity, bradykinesia, tremors, and problems of gait. But Parkinson is not just dopamine deficiency. There are also non-dopaminergic deficiencies like cholinergic, serotonergic. This gives rise to what is called as a non-motor symptoms. So as a postgrad student, you must be very careful to understand Parkinson's disease has motor symptoms as well as non-motor symptoms, which is very important to understand, which will not respond to dopamine because the non-motor symptoms are not due to dopamine deficiency. Now, as I was saying that the symptoms come only when there are 70 to 80% deficiencies there. So suppose it is a 50 to 60%, what will happen? That is called as a pre-symptomatic stage. What is the advantage of diagnosing in pre-symptomatic stage is that the research is on to identify the pre-symptomatic stage and prevent it to become symptomatic by appropriate disease modifying therapy. You know that in multiple sclerosis, we have disease modifying therapy to prevent subsequent clinical attacks. So similarly, the efforts are on to identify pre-symptomatic stage and try to see whether we can have some type of a therapy which can prevent them to go into symptomatic. Now, what are the pre-symptomatic stage symptoms? Look at that. Anosmia, insomnia, and constipation. So you ask any person in the age group of 50, many of them will have anosmia, especially in Bangalore, with half of us having allergic rhinitis. Insomnia is another common complaint in the patients around the age of 50 years in the community. Constipation is also another common complaint. So how can you say that these are all pre-symptomatic stage? But anyhow, this is very important. The most important of the three is the prevalence of olfactory loss in Parkinson's disease, 50 to 90% of them. Whenever you see a patient of Parkinson, ask them about the smell. You will find that many of them will say, oh, smell, I have lost it 2-3 years ago or 5 years ago. The normal population above 50 have 25% of anosmia, but the prevalence in Parkinson is as much as 90%. Now remember, it is idiopathic olfactory loss, not due to allergic rhinitis and other local problems. Now they have been followed up for 4 years with idiopathic olfactory loss. 13% of them have developed Parkinson's disease. And more important, asymptomatic relatives of these patients over a period of 2 to 3 years have developed 10% of them Parkinson's disease. So olfactory loss is a very useful clinical tool for pre-symptomatic diagnosis, and more important, whenever you see atypical Parkinson, vascular Parkinson, drug-induced Parkinson, that means the differential diagnosis of idiopathic Parkinson with other group, please ask for olfactory loss. If there is an olfactory loss, it is very typical of idiopathic Parkinson's disease. Now, the early onset of anosmia is by Brack's hypothesis. Now, what does this Brack hypothesized? He says that the deposition of alpha-synuclein, synuclein in the anterior olfactory structures appears in the earliest stage of Parkinson pathology. In 2003, he said that sporadic Parkinson disease is caused by a pathogen, maybe virus or bacterium, that enters the body via the nasal cavity. That is why the first symptom or a pre-symptomatic Parkinson is a loss of smell. Now this is swallowed and reaches the gut, which is responsible for constipation, and then it initiates the Lewy body pathology in the nose and digestive tract. So what does this mean? This means that Parkinson's disease is not just a neurodegenerative disease, but it is a systemic illness causing loss of smell, constipation, depression, and Parkinson's symptoms. The idea of looking at the premotor stage with PET scan and SPECT scan whenever you suspect these symptoms is to look for possible disease modifying therapy. Now that is about the pre-symptomatic, anosmia, constipation and depression. Now we go to the symptomatic, about 80% of the dopamine is lost. This I have already told you, unilateral onset, tremors, bradykinesia, rigidity, and most important is excellent response to levodopa. Those are the motor symptoms. As I told you, all are not due to dopamine deficiency. Due to other neurotransmitter deficiency, we get what is called as a non-motor symptoms. That itself is a big list, non-motor symptoms. They are number one, neuropsychiatric features. Patients have anxiety, panic attacks, more important, hallucinations. So if you find a man of 50 to 60 having hallucinations as the presenting symptom, it may be a non-motor symptom of Parkinson's disease. These non-motor symptoms can appear after the onset of motor symptoms. Sometimes it may even precede the onset of motor symptoms. So the patients also have dysautonomia causing hypotension, urinary dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, etc. Some more non-motor symptoms, sleep disorders. More important is what is called as REM, rapid eye movement behavior disorder, wherein the patient suddenly gets up from the sleep, becomes very violent, tries to destroy things, hit the partner in the bed. All this is part of what is called as a rapid eye movement behavior disorder. There are also other things like restless leg, periodic limb movement. Hyposmia, we have already said the most important feature of a non-Parkinson symptom is a hyposmia. Pain and fatigue is also there. The important thing is all these non-motor symptoms, because they are not related to dopamine deficiency, it is very difficult to manage these symptoms. And it also spells the prognosis and quality of life is poor in these patients. There are some more non-motor symptoms. So basically, the neurologists or even the Parkinson specialists will be seeing these conditions, what is called as impulse control disorder. There is an impulse to do something, but patient is not able to control. Failure to resist an impulse, drive or a temptation to perform an act that is harmful to the person. They may get up in the night and take a knife and then try to harm the person there or destroy the things. They just cannot control that impulse. Other things which have been described is a pathological gambling, hypersexuality, and there is a condition called as funding. It is a complex stereotype behavior, intense fascination with repetitive manipulation of technical equipment. They can go on and on and on and on with computer or a mobile phone, continuously handling, examining and sorting out common objects. They keep on sorting out objects 1, 2, 3, 4, again keep on 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is devoid of content. That means there's no meaning in those activities, but yet they keep on doing it. So you find that there are so many non-motor symptoms in a patient with Parkinson's disease which may appear most often after the motor symptoms. Sometimes it may be preceding it. So how do we manage this? We treat with atypical neuroleptics, clozapine, risperidone, quetiapine. They are all supposed to help some of these non-motor symptoms. Now, as I keep saying that Parkinson's disease and all movement disorders are clinical diagnosis. There is no investigation to be done to confirm the diagnosis. I already told you in the initial UK criteria, almost 99% you are perfect in diagnosis if you follow the clinical phenomena. But there is an interest to diagnose pre-motor stage for possible disease modifying therapy. Now, FDG PET, where we inject glucose, which shows the activity of the tissues. This is the normal basal ganglia having the normal dopamine. Activity is there in the basal ganglia. In Parkinson, you see the activity in basal ganglia is very much diminished. So that shows that the patient has dopamine, basal ganglia activities are less. Now, to specifically look for dopamine, we have what is called as a DAT scan. That is that dopamine transporter scan. A radioactive drug is injected and a SPECT scan is done. It shows the dopamine availability in the corpus striatum. Now, this is a normal dopamine availability. A patient who has essential tremor, where that scan is done to differentiate between essential tremor and Parkinson tremor, just for the sake of an academic interest, you will find that there is enough dopamine available, whereas in Parkinson tremor, the dopamine activity is much less. So this DAT scan and FDG PET will allow us to diagnose premotor stage. Now, when do we use this? Please remember, we do not use this for confirming the Parkinson's disease. Parkinson is a clinical diagnosis. Where do we use this? There are at times it is difficult to differentiate between essential tremors and Parkinson tremor. We may have to do this. Idiopathic Parkinson, from drug-induced Parkinson's disease, vascular Parkinson's disease, again, this will be helpful. Suppose the patient has probable drug-induced or a vascular Parkinson. To differentiate that from our idiopathic, one can use this. Very important point. It does not differentiate between Parkinson and atypical Parkinson. Whether PSP, MSA, CBD, all these things are not differentiated. So it is basically used some clinical situations where you suspect it may be drug induced or it is a vascular versus the idiopathic. So back to clinical neurology. Parkinson's disease is a clinical diagnosis, imaging investigations only rarely. 3 cheers for that. Now we have made a diagnosis. It is a Parkinson's disease of idiopathic variety, and patient has both motor and non-motor symptoms. The motor symptoms are due to dopamine deficiency. Now let us see the management. The evolution of the management, if you see, the description was done in 1817. The anticholinergic drugs were started in 19th century by Jean-Martin Charcot. Dopamine related to Parkinson's disease was established in 59, and 61 IV dopamine was tried with a remarkable effect, and the oral preparation started in 69. This is an interesting one. In 1953, Cooper, a neurosurgeon, was operating on a patient of Parkinson's disease, and unexpectedly he cut the anterior choroidal artery which supplies the basal ganglia. and immediately he ligated the arteries. What he found was a remarkable relief of tremor and rigidity on the opposite side. Remarkable relief. That gave an idea to target the basal ganglia with electrocoagulation. So a lot of surgical things were going on until the levodopa was made available. With that, the surgery was abandoned. But remember, the surgery has made a comeback from 97 onwards, because when levodopa started, we all felt, levodopa is there. It is like giving insulin or thyroxine in hypothyroid, insulin in diabetes. So it will go on for the lifetime. But we were disappointed that after 10 years of levodopa administration, the effect of levodopa started waning off, and a lot more side effects of levodopa started coming in. And so the surgeons came back into the clinical picture, and now we have what is called as a deep brain stimulation, which I'll be speaking to you again. Now, should we start the treatment? I keep saying in my Wednesday class that diagnosis does not mean immediate treatment. Essential tremor, if it is not affecting, don't have to treat. Patient has got Parkinson's disease, ask the patient how does it affect him. A patient who has got a left-sided mild bradykinesia, the wife brings to the patient to the hospital because during walking he does not move his left upper limb as well as right. You ask the patient, what is your problem? He says, I have no problem. It is my wife who is complaining. So then I explained to them that he has Parkinson's disease very early. We don't have to treat them because we don't have a cure for it. We can only control the symptoms. And if the symptom is not affecting the patient, we will wait. When the symptoms becomes a problem, at that time we will start the treatment. So please remember, diagnosis does not mean start treatment. If there is no functional impairment, no treatment. Some people give MAO inhibitors, Selgelin or Rasagelin, which is supposed to slow down the progress of the disease. So it is individual choice. But suppose the patient has a functional impairment. That means if the Parkinson is on the right side, there is a functional impairment. He is not able to write, he is not able to shave, he is not able to eat properly. Once it becomes functional impairment, ask what is the impairment due to. If it is tremors, anticholinergic drugs. If it is bradykinesia, rigidity, don't start levodopa, give dopa agonists. Like in diabetes, we don't start immediately insulin. We have so many other oral anti-diabetic drugs which may increase or stimulate the pancreas to secrete the insulin. So similarly, increased dopa production by dopa agonists are tried. Only when this fails, then we start the levodopa carbidopa. Why are we holding on to this? Because we know that this is effective for about 10 years. And after that, when the patient really requires levodopa, then it may not be efficient for that patient. So there are a number of drugs, MAO monoamine oxidase inhibitors, as I already told you, Selgelin, Rasagelin. It slows the breakdown of dopamine. Dopaminergic drugs, anticholinergics, amantadine, an antiviral drug which has been used. And finally, we come to the levodopa. Vitamin E, coenzymes, etc., are not useful. Now, levodopa, we cannot give, the basic drug is a chemical is a dopamine, but if you give dopamine orally, it gets destroyed in the stomach, in the intestine. So we give the precursor levodopa, which gets converted to dopamine, so that what we give, the conversion takes place in the brain, and so the sufficient amount of dopamine is released in the brain and not in the gut. So it is metabolized by two pathways, one by decarboxylation. So we give carbidopa. So all our preparations in the market has levodopa, carbidopa combination. There is also another method of metabolism. So we give a combination of levodopa and entacapone. So levodopa administration over 5 to 7 years becomes less effective. As I said, start only when it is required. Now, as the disease progresses, first 5 years, no problem, anybody can treat. Next 5 years, neurologists will treat. And another next 5 years, we may require the help of a movement disorder specialist because there is an advancement of the disease. There are some problems related to DOPA, motor fluctuations, what is called as off and on. Suddenly the person becomes stiff, unable to move because the drug effect has worn off, or the patient have too much motor dyskinesias because of the fluctuations. And hallucination is a very important. They get up in the night, they say some thief is standing there outside, please go and verify. And then they go and see at the gate, nobody is there, but he's not believing it because he is hallucinating it. They are hallucinating about the relationships of individuals within the house. So all types of problems are there related to DOPA. So whenever you find hallucinations, try to modify the dosage of DOPA downwards. So these are related to levodopa, which has to be adjusted according to the patient's problem. There are some which are disease related. For example, freezing of the gait, postural imbalance. Postural imbalance is the one which does not respond to levodopa preparation. Freezing of the gait. As they are talking, they suddenly stop as though the feet are completely stuck to the ground. They make a lot of efforts to get over that. That is called as a freezing of the gait. Very embarrassing and very dangerous, because as they are crossing the road, suddenly they freeze. Then the driver who is coming there thinks that he will be able to cross the road, and he continues to drive, and this man suddenly freezes right in the middle of the road. So this is a real problem. Dysarthria, dementia, or other disease related. So how do we manage wearing off? That means the drug effect is going down. So increase the frequency of the dose, use long-acting controlled release preparations, or add dopaminergic drugs. Dose failure, this is another important practical point. So somebody comes to the house unannounced, and the person is still stiff. He is yet to take the medicine. The medicine takes about half an hour to 1 hour to act. So you want a quick action of the drug. So dissolve the levodopa preparation in the soda water or even lime water. Soda without any other additions, please. Soda water or even lime water, and gulp it. And within few minutes, he will be able to move around. So this is a dose failure, how to use it by carbonated water. Freezing, try to increase the dosage more frequently. If the dyskinesias occur at the peak dose, obviously common sense says reduce L-DOPA or add amantadine. Dyskinesias are very well treated by adding amantadine at that time. There is a postural hypotension, you can use droxidopa. Then we have further advances, what is called as a rescue drug. Now it is available, apomorphine subcutaneous injections, which will cause dramatic improvement in the patient's mobility, but very short-lived. So you may have to give 3 times a day. Rotigotin skin patch came with a lot of fanfare, but not working very well. Mouth dissolving tablets yet to start. IV levodopa infusion not yet. Intrajejunal infusions are available, but these are all done when the patient is almost bedridden, unable to get out for the basic living. Then we come to the surgical management. Initially, we used to destroy what is called as ablative procedures, pallidotomy and thalamotomy. Now we don't destroy it, we do deep brain stimulation. Most important is subthalamic nucleus, and for tremors, thalamus, deep brain stimulation. Now, even though it is the basal ganglia which are concerned with this, the thalamus, because of the tracts from the basal ganglia. So if you do the stimulation, deep brain stimulation, the thalamus, the tremors are excellently controlled. Before the patient says, doctor, can I go for surgery? Please remember and remind him the speech, cognition, and most important, postural instability. What really bothers them as the disease advances is the frequent falls, which is due to postural instability, and that does not improve by surgery. That's a very important point to stress the patient. Long ago, when I was in NIMHANS, of course, it was started in 1963 in NIMHANS, and Dr. Verma still at that time when I was there used to do what is called as a percutaneous thalamotomy. Looking at the skull X-ray, he used to put a needle through the foramen oil and then inject a chemical, I think a small amount of alcohol. And on the table, on the X-ray table, the tremors used to cease. The patient used to get up without tremors and used to profusely thank Dr. Verma for that. Can you believe that he used to accurately go into the basal ganglia and used to inject a chemical which stops the tremor? After that, of course, the ablative procedures and now the deep brain stimulation has started. So in deep brain stimulation, it is a very neurosurgical procedure where a basal ganglia, an electrode is placed and this electrode is managed just like in patients with in cardiac problems where they have similar thing is there. Is a good response to, now this is a very important point again. Postural instability does not respond. Patient must be responsive to levodopa. It is, if the patient is not able to respond to levodopa, then DBS is of no use. But if he is responding to levodopa, why are you doing DBS? Yes, very good point. He responds, but for a very short time, or he responds with side effects of dyskinesia. So in that situation, then only the patient will have a patient is ready for a DBS procedure. It's a very expensive. Patient should be able to operate the battery, and for tremors, thalamus is the one. If the selection of the patient is good, excellent benefit up to 80%. So what are the contraindications? Number one contraindication is there is no response to levodopa, cognitive, postural instability, etc. Now that finishes the idiopathic Parkinson's disease. Then we go to what is called as a secondary Parkinsonism. That means the Parkinsonism features not due to degenerative disease. There is a long list of secondary Parkinsonism. The commonest what we see is the patients on bipolar disorders who have been on risperidone, haloperidol for a long period of time. They come with drug-induced Parkinsonism. Very, very important in clinical practice. I keep seeing patients with so-called giddiness in inverted commas or on Wartin. Most of the giddiness is anxiety related, but they feel very great with Wartin or Betavert and things like that. There are people who are taking this for years together, self-prescription, years together. And you see them with Parkinson features, you should ask for history of drugs. Post-head injury, manganese carbon monoxide, hypoxic encephalopathy, Wilson's disease. In young patients who come with Parkinson's disease, you must look for Wilson's disease, which is eminently treatable condition. Now, how do you diagnose drug-induced? Symmetric concept. Remember, Parkinson idiopathic is asymmetric. Rigidity, tremors are very less or not seen. Rigidity is the main problem. Non-progressive. They may also have other drug-induced side effects like dyskinesias, akathisia. And if you want to differentiate, you can use a DAT-SPECT, dopamine transport imaging, which will be normal in drug-induced Parkinson. I quote here one of my patients, a 58-year-old male who had a new onset seizures with no comorbidities. He was given IV valproate 1 gram followed by 500 PD. Investigations for seizures were normal. Post-seizure recovered completely, back to his work, continuing valproate because anti-epileptic drug. 3 weeks later, he started becoming slow, difficulty to walk, difficulty to shave. On examination, he has features of Parkinson. What is that? Rigidity, but there are no tremors. So probable valproate side effect, the serum level was very high, beyond 100. Valproate was withdrawn gradually and levetiracetam added. 2 weeks later, he became normal. So this is a classical example of a drug-induced Parkinsonism due to valproate toxicity, which is less understood. Most often we say drugs means antipsychotic. Please remember valproate toxicity. This is a secondary Parkinsonism due to drug. Now we move to the third one, vascular Parkinsonism. Now this is like vascular dementia. The patient has vascular background, multi-infarct state, hypertension, diabetes, and usually the Parkinsonism symptoms occur rather rapidly, not like degenerative disease. And what is most important is what is it resembles Parkinson is the gait. The patients are brought because of the difficulty in walking. When you ask them to walk, they shuffle. So you think, ah, this is a Parkinson's disease. But remember, it is only the lower half symptoms. The upper limbs are completely normal. Unlike the Parkinson, which is a hemi-Parkinson. That means right hand, right leg, not both lower limbs only. So again, it is a clear-cut clinical diagnosis. Then lastly, we go to the atypical Parkinsonism, which is important to make a diagnosis, not because we are able to treat, but because we don't have to investigate exhaustively and extensively. When do you suspect Parkinson's syndrome? Symptoms of onset are symmetric rigidity, symmetric bradykinesia, poor response to L-DOPA. I think is a very important point. Poor response to L-DOPA, and no patient of Parkinson falls at least in the first 5 years. If anybody within the 2 years he starts having frequent falls, it is due to postural instability, which does not occur in idiopathic Parkinson. So you must think of Parkinson's syndrome. Hallucinations, freezing, dementia, no tremors, no tremors. So when you see this, automatically you think of Parkinson plus, or also called as atypical Parkinson. There are four varieties: PSP, multisystem atrophy, CBD, and dementia with Lewy bodies. As the name shows, supranuclear palsy, so there is something wrong with the eyes. So what happens? There is a vertical supranuclear gaze palsy. So whenever you see a patient who has been brought for frequent falls and you find there is a bilateral rigidity, first thing to do is examine the eyes, the vertical eye movement. You will find that there is a patient is unable to look up and look down, but horizontal movements are quite normal. There you are, you have a diagnosis, PSP. We do give levodopa. Some people respond for some time, but generally it is not as good as response as in idiopathic Parkinson. Now in my Wednesday class, whenever we ask PSP, what does MR scan show? Everybody is aware of what is called as a hummingbird sign, like a hummingbird with a beak like this. Now this is because this is the pons, this is the midbrain atrophy. Because it is atrophied midbrain, it looks like a hummingbird, which is diagnostic of PSP after you make a clinical diagnosis. Please remember, in fact, this MR scan belongs to a person who does not have any type of Parkinson features. And we see this commonly in the MR cuts. So diagnosis confirmed only after you have made a clinical diagnosis. The second type is the MSA, multi-system atrophy. As the word says, multi-system. It is not only the extrapyramidal disorder, but also there is an autonomic dysfunction and cerebellar features. So autonomic Parkinson cerebellar combination is called as a multi-system atrophy. Again, response to L-DOPA is not that good. The third variety is called as a cortico-basal degeneration. Again, self-explanatory, basal ganglia. So the patient has evidence of rigidity and bradykinesia, but no tremors. Cortico involvement of the frontoparietal cortex. So the patient has got what is called as a alien limb or a useless arm. He doesn't know that this is his limb at all. Plus, patient has evidence of dystonia. Now, this is a freezed or a photograph of a dystonic limb, and he is also has an alien limb. He is not aware of it. He doesn't use that limb. So these are the cortico-basal degeneration. The last one of the atypical is dementia with Lewy body. That means in addition to Parkinson features, patient has dementia. All Parkinson patient over a period of time after 10 years, some of them may develop dementia, but here in dementia with Lewy body, they develop dementia in the first year or two. Now, what is in the pipeline? What is happening in the management? To date, there is no disease modifying therapy available, but there are quite efforts on. There are some 10% or familial Parkinson's disease. Patients will ask, doctor, is it genetic? Is my son going to get? Only 10% of them have that, and that also people who have got abnormalities in PARK11 or PARK16. So in the management, The advances are in terms of gene therapy. It aims to treating the disease by genetically modifying the cells, and gene delivery to target cells are through viral vectors, what is called as adeno-associated virus. So the gene therapy, again, it has to be a procedure where the delivery is done into the basal ganglia or subthalamic nucleus. Stem cell therapy. Nowadays, every disease, degenerative disease, stem cell therapy. Long ago, stem cell therapy was made popular, I think, in one of the South American countries, in one of the boxers there, and then the person published the literature, but it could not be replicated in the other parts of the world. So it is still not conclusive whether stem cell therapy helps or not. And the source for the stem cell is human embryo, autologous, or man-made. It is still under clinical trials, yet to prove its efficacy. So what are the conclusions? Parkinson's disease is now recognized as a multi-system disorder because it affects the smell, constipation, depression, and then basal ganglia with motor and non-motor features. Motor due to dopamine deficiency and non-motor due to other neurotransmitter deficiency. Levodopa effects are not long-lasting, which we realized after when it was discovered. Everybody was so happy that we have got a treatment for Parkinson like thyroxine or insulin. But over a period of time, we knew that levodopa is not effective. So when we know it is not effective, please use it sparingly, not with the diagnosis. There are efforts to do augment or do the other problems like pharmacological, deep brain stimulation, gene therapy, stem cell therapy. Management of non-motor symptoms remains a challenge because it is not dopamine related. We have several antipsychotics, antidepressant drugs which we use. What is really in the pipeline is a pre-symptomatic diagnosis aided by imaging and then trying some disease modifying therapy. If and when we are able to get disease modifying therapy, maybe when you go to ENT surgeon saying that, doctor, I am not able to smell properly, he may refer you to a neurologist to do the imaging. And if it shows the that scan is defective, you may be prescribed a modifying therapy. But as of now, please don't use that scan to make a diagnosis of pre-symptomatic therapy because you will be unnecessarily taxing the brain of the patient with all sorts of unnecessary depression. As the disease advances, the management is more an art. How much to increase levodopa, how to reduce, when to reduce, what not to reduce. Now, one point which I forgot in the clinical practice is we always tell them to take this levodopa, carbidopa at a fixed time, 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock. In the first 2-3 years, patient can take one in the morning, one in the night. There is enough dopamine storage in the brain. But as the storage becomes less and less, the duration of action becomes less and less. So we give it at fixed time for a reason. She says at 8 o'clock I take, by 9:30, 10, I find that the effect has gone. So then we advance the next dose to 10 o'clock. So the patient must take at a particular time, or if he says, doctor, 12 o'clock dose when I take, I get lot of involuntary movement, dyskinesia after 1 hour. Then we reduce that particular dose. So which dose to decrease, which dose to increase depends on the patient's symptom related to the dosing. And so we want the dosing to be fixed on those timings. Second point, the drug is best absorbed on empty stomach because generally when we prescribe, they say, sir, inna breakfast ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ, breakfast ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ತಗೋಬೋದಾ, ಊಟ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ತಗೋಬೋದಾ. Now the food competes with the drug for absorption, and so the drug is less absorbed when a stomach is having some food. So it should be taken on an empty stomach. Now people take on an empty stomach and within 10 minutes they have a breakfast. Now that is not empty stomach. At least 3 hours, at least 30 minutes to 1 hour should lapse before the patient has something else. So these are the important clinical points. And as the disease advances, out of experience, we have more art than